Hello, everybody. This is Robert Arlinghaus, speaking from Germany, recording from Germany. I'm with the Leibniz Institute of Freshwater Ecology and Inland Fisheries, and I'm a professor for integrated fisheries management at the Humboldt University of Berlin in Germany. And I'm presenting here as the author on behalf of a PhD student who actually successfully finished his PhD at Michigan State University, Payam Aminpour, together with his advisor or main advisor, Stephen Gray, Antonie, Joshua Introne, and Alison. And we together have done a paper using data collected actually in Germany from German anglers to test a very interesting question. We think that you can use the individual knowledge held by stakeholders, in our case anglers, and use their knowledge as a wisdom of the crowd. And our big question is whether we can approximate the knowledge that a crowd or a group of fisheries biologists have on the same topic, in our case, pike population dynamics, and whether this knowledge is held also by anglers or stakeholders more generally. So this idea of wisdom of the crowd is a rather old one, early 20th century. It was first shown using guesstimates of a dead bull, actually collected from several independent people, that the average estimate of the weight of this bull actually would approximate the reality very closely. So you need many diverse people that independently of each other provide knowledge, and then the average solution could be a form of collective intelligence that approximates reality quite well. So this wisdom of the crowd is well established in the literature and has been particularly well studied in very simple estimation tasks. For example, how many beans are in this jar, what's the weight of this dead ox, how many leaves are on a tree, and things like that. Obviously, when you deal with the reality underwater, it becomes substantially more complex, because even for a scientist, it's really hard to say what the truth is. For example, what's the population size of northern pike in a given lake is usually very hard to answer, because things are underwater and fish are moving and invisible. On the other hand, perhaps through accumulated experience, stakeholders, in our case anglers, are really able in understanding by your experiential learning what the key ecological factors are that drive the target stock. For example, whether habitat is limited, here with a typo by a scientist who also does errors, or whether cormorants have scars and things like that. So it's really hard to provide a population size estimate, perhaps, but maybe it's not so hard to mine the reality, the knowledge of many different anglers, and approximate the population ecology and the factors that drive population ecology by things that matter to people. In our case, northern pike, which is a key prime species of for recreation angling in Germany, at least, and I guess also in some parts of the US. And in fact, that is what scientists like myself and many others also do. They kind of use studies, experiments, observational data to come up with a reality, so to speak, of which factors drive the population dynamics of that species. So for example, be it cormorants or anglers or some form of habitat that is limiting, that is affecting the species, such as plants in the case of pike. And of course, you can systematically try to reveal that knowledge using techniques, fuzzy cognitive mapping, mental model exercises, how it's called, where you try to use visuals, graphics, to show the relationships between nodes, factors here, ecological factors, and their relationship, positive or negative, to other factors. So for example, nutrients that lead to algae, who then lead to zooplankton, and so on. So the web of knowledge can be revealed, and we call this an individual mental model, a representation of the reality, in our case, pike population dynamics. And obviously, you can now do the same exercise if you want to reveal what people know that are not biologists, that don't have an academic training in fisheries biologists. We can ask the research question whether the collective intelligence held in these mental models of, in our case, anglers, actually represent the group understanding that a bunch of fisheries biologists has. And that was what we studied. We actually put out the same task to each individual stakeholder, as well as a bunch of fisheries biologists, map out the ecological relationships that drive pike populations, and then we compared the group's collective intelligence, we call it the crowd's mental model of the anglers, to the crowd mental model of the fisheries biologists, to see how closely they match in structure and function. So we developed this collective intelligence solution by independently asking individual anglers and combining their knowledge to what people think on average or as a majority vote in the population that we're serving, in our case on pike. And the research question we then ask is, can a crowd of anglers predict the ecological and social factors that drive pike populations in a way that is similar to the best scientific understanding? So we have a lot of research that shows that in a simple estimation task, weight of a bowl, jar, beans in a jar, or even the size of some monument somewhere in a city, that the average solution of individual estimates is pretty good. But what about a substantially more complex case of a social ecological system representation, where people have to integrate and show ecological relationships that can be positive, that can be negative, that can be direct or indirect, and where also humans through actions such as fishing come into play. So we collected our data in a large study called Besatzfisch, dealing with stocked fishes in Germany over, I think it was early 2012 or so, where we set up 17 workshops with local angling clubs. You have to know that in Germany, fishing rights are private property. They belong to, for example, angling associations, angling clubs, who are leaseholders or owners of fishing rights. And in this position, they can harvest the fish, but they also have to invest back into sustainable resource use, for example, through habitat enhancement, through design of own regulations, through stocking, etc. So we took 17 of these clubs, we invited the club heads, the fisheries managers, which are basically lay people elected from the club membership that go through a 1 or 2 week training course in fisheries management. So it's really light education compared to, let's say, a master's of science degree, and also interested anglers. So we had 3 types of anglers: the ordinary anglers, the club managers, those that run basically the show, finances, etc. in the background, and the fisheries managers, those that are tasked with actually doing stocking. And you would think that they have at least a little bit more of formal training, although it's not, as I say, it's not a biology degree, what these people usually have. And we collected 218 of these mental models. So we went into the clubs, we did the workshops, and then had the people individually map out the cause and effect relationships of the pike populations. And then we made a picture out of that, and then actually quantified the relationships, the strength of the relationships, etc., and made our analysis based on that data set. And we did the same task with 17 fisheries biologists in my institute, but in a neighboring fisheries institute as well, and made a group mental model there as well. This is how it looks like. You have in the center the harvestable pike stock, we call them the adult fish, and then people were asked to actually place cards. That's the ecological factors that are nutrients, refuge, habitat quality, young fish, cormorants, etc., and then show an error, and then show with pluses, plus, double pluses, or minus, or double minus, kind of a regression coefficient, how strong the relationship between 2 factors are, whether it's positive or negative. We gave everybody the same set of cards. They didn't have to use them all, and they could also add new cards, new ecological concepts if something was missing. And so it was a little bit directed, so it's not like free drawing, but we gave them cards, arrows, and then we asked them, okay, how does it work in pike? Make your own drawing. And that we then transformed into data and analyzed them with using fuzzy cognitive mapping techniques. And then we used different indicators to, first of all, compare the group's result of the anglers and of subgroups of the anglers, the managers, the normal anglers, and the club heads, to the bunch of biologists again, and we compare first the structure. So how similar does the network look like? Different indicators were used for that. And then there's a technique where you can actually change the value of certain concepts. For example, you can increase the habitat quality, And then you can use a technique to see how that would trickle down in the mental model. So how the positives and negatives, the relationships in the network, what that would mean for the center, which is the pike, in each of the mental models, and then compare the function of the mental model in terms of the perceived reality, so to speak, how certain things would affect the pike stock, right? So that's what we call dynamics. We have different indicators. For time reasons, I'm just going to jump directly into three, but telling you that actually, from the structural perspectives, the group's mental models of the anglers look very, very similar to the ones of the scientists. There was over 80% agreement in the notes and in the errors that were laid. So very, very convincing solution, which was only the case for the group of all anglers combined. If you just look at the subgroups, anglers, managers, and the club heads, the solution is worse. So you actually need the knowledge of all of them, and then it looks structurally very similar. We can also look at the centrality profile. That's the third indicator that we use. So how central is a certain concept in the whole network? And we used here perceptions of the management action. So how people thought, how central stocking is, spawning grounds, angling pressure, and so on. You can read it yourself. And there's an indicator to test the centrality of that very important concept in the mental model. And here is these three central concepts. The crowd mental model is the combination of these 218 individually collected mental models from the anglers compared to the 17 experts. And you see that the matching is almost 100%. So the centrality of the concepts in the entire network is almost identical in the anglers crowd compared to the experts. If you, however, look at individual subgroups, the ordinary anglers, you see here that that matching is no longer so clear. For example, anglers express higher centrality for angling pressure and riparian plants, whereas the experts place higher centrality, higher importance, so to speak, in the population dynamics, so refuge, submerged aquatic plants, and stocking. So very different, or somewhat different, or more different if you look at the subgroup level. And this also holds for club managers as well as for the fisheries managers that are not identical as in the crowd solution. So you need, in other words, those three subgroups and their individually held knowledge to come up with the best solution, at least from a structural perspective. The next question then was asking, what about the functional perspective? So what's the perceived function of these individual ecological concepts? So in other words, for example, if you would increase cormorant predation, what would happen in people's mind with the pike stock in the center? Actually, it's a largemouth bass. That should be a pike in the center there. So that's what we call functional perspective. If you change the relevance of certain nodes, how does this affect the center of interest, the people's perception about what it means for the pike stock as a whole? And so you change, for example, fishing pressure, and then something happens at the center solution, which is the pike stock. And we can quantify that functional response, so to speak, through, again, a series of indicators. And I will show you here one particular case. Again, you have the crowd situation, the mental model of all combined, and then the individual subgroups. And experiment number simply means certain things that changed in this mental model. And on the right, you see the distance to what the experts saw. And the closer they are to the experts, the closer you are to the origin here. And the smaller this indicator is that is shown here. And the first key result is, if you look just at the abstract values, in all of our experiments, the crowd model had the shortest distance to the expert results. In other words, performed most similarly to how the experts believe that things work. Fisheries managers, club managers, and particularly the anglers perform worse as a subgroup. Again, the crowd solution is pretty close to reality, but you need the knowledge, the perceptions of the three subgroups. It wouldn't be good to have many, many, many anglers, ordinary anglers, the green ones here, because that would actually produce a result that is not that similar to what the fisheries biologists think. Finally, a methodological result. How do you aggregate now these individual knowledge? And we tested two different ways of doing that. The first is giving each individual person the same weight. So it's a single level aggregation, we call it. So when you produce the crowd's mental model, each individual contributes the same to the end result. That's one version. The second, which we call multi-level aggregation, is that you first do a subgroup crowd model, and then you average across a subgroup. So you first anglers as a whole, managers as a whole, fisheries managers as a whole, and then you combine. So that first removes variation because you make crowd solution by subgroup, and then you introduce variation again by merging across subgroups. And we tested the performance of the two, and if wisdom of the crowd is present, it means the more people are involved in the solution, the better the solution. So you need people to be independent in their guesses, but also you need people to be diverse, and you need many people. The more people are involved, the better the solution. That's at least the textbook case of wisdom of the crowd. There's, of course, a literature telling you that under certain conditions, you need certain experience levels, education levels, etc., to come up with actually a reasonable solution, the more complex the problem is. Anyway, so we tested these two because we want to give people that want to apply this method a toolbox to apply it actually and avoid errors. Here is the result of the group size. In other words, the number of people that are involved in the solution and the performance error. The closer you are to the origin, the better is the solution. And first of all, you find that the single level aggregation method actually produces a dome-shaped relationship. That means a small group size or some intermediate level of unknown size produces the best result. And that is not what wisdom of the crowd wants, particularly because there's the empirical uncertainty, what that optimal group size will be. And importantly, the more people are involved, the worse is the solution. However, if you do the multi-level aggregation, so first by subgroup, you do the group mental model, and then you merge the three subgroups, then you get a beautiful result that the more people are involved in the solution, the less is the error, the better is the performance. And that is what wisdom of the crowd would mean. So good result, you can mine the cognitive ability of individual stakeholders and come up with a solution that is close to science, to the scientific solution. However, you have to do it in the right way. And if you just have, for example, a biased sample of just ordinary anglers, then many anglers, some errors, some bias that people have would accumulate and actually deteriorate your group solution. You really need to have those different types of people that are maybe more similar within each other, but dissimilar towards each other to create the diversity that you need to come up with a good solution. And it's, of course, an empirical question what characteristics you can look at as a user. In our case, we just had luck perhaps by having these clear categories of managers, club managers, fisheries managers, and anglers. It's not so obvious what that characteristics is if you, for example, do an online survey on anglers. You don't know who of these anglers are important in the solution, who is not, or whether it's all the same like-minded crowd that actually would produce, if not corrected, a biased solution. So that's where we really need to jump in the next science step to better understand the characteristics of people. How can you weigh them? How can you use them to come up with a good solution? So to conclude, we can show that not only in simple estimation tasks, such as what's the weight of a bull, but also when you want to find out the complexity, for example, of ecological relationships, that fisheries stakeholders can produce a solution that is pretty similar to the best scientific understanding of the same problem. In our case, pike population dynamics, both in structure and in function. However, the correct aggregation method is really crucial. Otherwise, larger groups can reduce performance. And collective intelligence, in general in fisheries, seems to be a reasonable and useful avenue for the future, but it demands heterogeneous samples that represent different knowledge bases. At least that is what we can infer from this one study. There's not that much published in this field, and so I hope some of you get excited about it and actually try to come up with more papers and more studies to test this very interesting idea. If you want to read about the details, this is published this year. This paper has appeared in Nature Sustainability, and you can also, just write me an email if you have problems getting it, or look at our websites, ResearchGate and www.ifishman.de. So with that, thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the off-site discussion. And thank you very much. Bye-bye.